This is Chapter 1, Lesson 6, Video A. There'll be a number of videos. This is kind of a long lesson, so we're going to break it up into a number of videos. We have these 5 different topics that we're going to discuss as we go through these. And so, again, we'll try to break these down into small sections so you can kind of get this information in its small packages. So we're looking at angles, so we want to determine angle measure, classify those angles, identify some angle pairs. Those are relationships, again, that will allow us to write some mathematical expressions. We'll look at angle addition postulate, which is very similar to segment addition postulate, and then we'll look at analyzing diagrams. As we go through the year, there are some things that you need to be aware of when you're looking at diagrams in your book. So let's go ahead and tackle this first section, angles. So let's talk about the definition of angles and then naming them, and then we'll move from there. So again, we're going to read this paragraph. We're going to just pick out the key points that we need to know. We don't want to copy it, and then we'll put that in our notes, and then we'll go from there. So an angle is formed by 2 rays, okay, so that's important. 2 rays, and those 2 rays with the same endpoint. The rays are the sides of the angle, okay. The endpoint of the angle is called the vertex. The sides of the angle are shown, and here it gives an example of BT and BQ. The vertex is B, and then it says you could name this angle angle B, angle TBQ, angle QBT, or angle 1. Well, that's a lot of different ways to name an angle. How do we know which one to use and how to use those? So we'll talk about that as well as we wrap this video up. Okay, so the key points here about an angle are: number 1, it has 2 rays with the same endpoint. Secret question, I'd like you to answer this in your notes. What other rays have we had this year that share the same endpoint? Okay, so go ahead and answer that question. Alright, so the 2 rays that share the same endpoint, the rays themselves are the sides of the angle. So ray BT up here would be one side of the angle, and ray BQ would be the other side of the angle. So the area in between here, all of this area in between, that's small here but gets larger if you were to color this in as you went out like this, okay, this is considered the angle, this area in between. These rays simply form the sides of the angle, and all this area in between is considered the angle. Okay, the endpoint of the 2 rays right here, B, that's called the vertex of the angle. Very important word. That's called the vertex of the angle. And then we need to use the angle symbol when we're naming the angle. Okay, so here would be an example you might want to put in your notes. You have the angle drawn, you have these labels, and then you have the different ways to name it. Well, again, we have all these names when it comes to angle or ways to name it. What are the rules, or how do I know which one to use? So a few very important things to remember about naming angles. First of all, you always have to use the angle symbol when you're talking about an angle. Just like we always need to use a line symbol when we're talking about a line, or a segment symbol with segment, ray symbol with rays. Okay, because there creates confusion if you don't. I'll show you what to mean in just a moment. So you can use a single letter to name the angle. However, if you're going to use the single letter, you must use the vertex letter. You can't use any letter you want. The single letter that you use has to be the vertex. So now you also need to use the angle symbol, which I said here. And the reason is right here. If we're only using a single letter, what other geometric thing that we've talked about this year do you name using a single letter? A point, right? So if I just write a single letter A down, but I mean angle, well, that looks like you just named a point, because we use a single letter to name a point. So how do I know if you're talking about a point or an angle? Okay, you can't leave it up to the person to assume or to try to figure it out. You have to be very specific about what you're naming. So you can use the angle with a single letter, which if we go back to our example here that they used angle B. Notice the B is the vertex, and they use the angle symbol. Okay, you can't use T, and you cannot use Q as your single letter. Why not? Well, that goes back to the rule I just gave you. Why can't you use T or Q? Because the letter that you use has to be the vertex, nothing else. Okay, now you can also name it using 3 letters. Now a couple rules here. Again, you have to use the angle symbol talk about it in just a moment. But the middle letter must be the vertex. The vertex must be in the middle. Okay, the other two letters, how you use them, that doesn't matter. And again, if we go back here to the example, they said TBQ and QBT. Notice in both examples, B is in the middle. The middle letter must be the vertex of the angle. You can then use T and Q or Q and T. That way, or that order doesn't matter, but the middle letter must be the vertex. Now again, we have to use the angle symbol because again, what other figure have we talked about earlier in this year that also uses three letters to name them? Well, that would be a plane. So again, if you don't use the angle letter, I might think you're talking, as a matter of fact, I would think you're talking about a plane when you really meant an angle. So using the appropriate symbol is very important. Okay? So one final thing is you can't always just use a single letter. Okay? There's one very specific rule that has to be followed, and that is you can only use a single letter if the angle is all by itself. Okay? If there's more than one angle that has the same vertex, you must use three letters. Okay? And I'm going to show you an example of what I'm talking about right here. If you look at this figure, you actually have three angles shown. You have this angle 1 here. You have this angle, which is the which is this area shown from here to here. So again, all this area in here is angle 1. You also have angle 2, which would be here and here, and that would be all of this area shaded in here. There's also a third angle, which goes from here all the way to here, which would be this whole area. So you have three angles actually shown in this diagram. What is the vertex of all three angles? Well, the vertex is B. You do AB and ABC, or sorry, BA and BC for this angle. You have BC and BD for this angle, and you have BA and BD for this angle. So this letter B is the vertex of all three. So if you were to name the angle B, there's confusion because which angle are you talking about? Are you talking about angle 1, which has a vertex of B, or are you talking about angle 2, which has a vertex of B? Or are you talking about this angle out here, which also has a vertex of B? So whenever you have one vertex for multiple angles, you must use three letters. And that's what we're talking about right here. You must use three letters when naming an angle where the vertex is the vertex of more than one angle. And again, when using three letters, you want to do remember the order. So if I wanted to name angle 1 here, okay, I could name it angle 1. That's okay because there's only one angle that the number 1 is in. Okay. For angle 2, I could just use one number because 2 is only in between here. But if I wanted to use letters and I wanted to name angle 1, I have to use three letters. So again, the B, because it's the vertex, must be in the middle. So I can use A and C in any order I want. So I could use A, B, C, or I also could have used angle CBA, either way. If I wanted to name angle 2 then, B has to be in the middle, so 2 is formed by these two rays. So I would say angle CBD. And then if I wanted to name this larger angle that doesn't have a number, it would be angle ABD. And notice, what's the middle letter of all three? B, because B is the vertex of all three. So if I just use this, we really wouldn't know which one we're talking about. Okay, so that's the definition of the angle. That's the way to name an angle. So why don't you go ahead and look in your book and see some of the examples that have you name angles, and then you go ahead and check out the next video.